Okay, Calvin, ready? This is take one.
Oh God.
Quiet on the set.
Okay, I'm quiet.
Stand by.
Standing.
You ready?
Ready.
And action.
So then my doctor said to me, "You got to stop putting that Farkle cup up your butt. It's not how you play the game." Hello and welcome to the. Let's start that over.
This is take two.
Take two. I'm not. I got the jokes in the bag. Hello and welcome to the You Show Show. It is the show where you show things. I am Kelvin Lazy McMurray, and today I am joined by my very, 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 very good friend, Michael Graf. Mike, hello and welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. I've got a little frog in my throat, so I apologize. It makes me sound, my voice is a little bit deeper now, so it's got this more raspy, sexy Lauren Bacall thing going on.
Absolutely. Too much footballs, too much of the sports, and now you sound like... But it's kind of fitting for the movie that you picked. It kind of fits in that theme of everything, so we'll get into that in a minute, But Mike, you are a good friend. We are celebrating this January. It's currently December. This January, I did the math, and we'll have known each other for 8 years this January, which is pretty.
Oh wow!
Pretty crazy. Yeah.
I did. Wow.
Yeah, it's 2012 when I met you. So yeah.
That's crazy.
But Mike you are the owner. You are the Emmy award-winning writer and director of Spot Filmworks. So if anybody would like to check out Mike's work, please head over to spotfilmworks.com. Do you do any other social platforming with your company?
Well, it's I've the last year or so I've kind of been pivoting in another direction. So I've actually, besides spotfilmworks.com, that's kind of the home for my life as a commercial director and working in advertising. I'm also a feature film writer.
Yep.
And I have a website called grafwrites.com.
Okay.
It's new. It's still kind of in work in progress, but I've won a couple of cool awards and accolades and stuff. And I thought, oh boy, I should probably put something out there about that part of my life.
Yeah. So. Well, and I know, you've been doing a ton of writing this year. The probably only silver lining to this goddamn pandemic. So, anything that you want to talk about on that front, or just check out the site?
Yeah, I am real excited, and I don't even know if I told you this. 2 weeks ago, I was named one of the top 25 screenwriters to watch in 2021.
Dude, shit, yeah.
Dude, by the International Screenwriters Association.
Dude.
80,000 members strong International Screenwriters Association. So I'm kind of flying high on that.
I bet.
I've got 2 new screenplays that I finished. I'm negotiating with a producer, a former executive at Disney Studios, for The Last Indian War, an older screenplay that you know about. So it's been an interesting year, working, kind of pivoting towards writing and concentrating on that, which is always kind of my first love, kind of long form storytelling.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I know you've been writing like a madman, and you've been submitting a lot too. I've been seeing, and we've talked about it, and I've seen a lot on like your personal Facebook about a lot of the awards and things that have been going on. So that's awesome. That's awesome to hear. I wish we had like a live studio audience. I'd put the applaud sign on right now, but unfortunately it's just you and me. So I could get Nat in here, like, congrats, Mike.
That's right.
Yeah, she'll fucking kill me.
She'll really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's what she signed up for. Well, welcome. Yeah, thanks for being here today. So obviously, today we're gonna talk about movies, and I'm really excited. My first guest, my friend Ian, he picked music to talk about, and I love music. I soak up as much music as I can, but I don't really know how to talk about music. I'm a person where like I tapped my foot and I liked it. It was great.
Yeah.
And so that was a little tough for me to talk about, but we got through it. And then my friend Zeke picked she picked TV shows to talk about, and similar thing. I'm not a huge TV aficionado. I enjoy television, but I'm not I'm not an expert by any means, and I'm not an expert at film either. But it's at least like the one thing I technically did go to school for. So so I'm pretty excited today. So we're talking about movies.
Yeah, I'm a movie nerd. I'm a film nerd. So this was right up my alley. It's I love all things film and all things movie related, and it's like I can go down the deepest rabbit hole with you on this subject matter. So.
Oh yeah, I could find you in a bar, passed out on the bar in a drunken stupor, wake you up, and you could recite like 3 movie facts right off the top of your head. So yeah, oh for sure.
Which has actually happened.
I was gonna say that's probably happened at least once in our time knowing each other. Well, I guess the movies the film that you picked today to talk about that I watched that I really liked was Touch of Evil by Orson Welles.
Yeah.
What was it? 1958, I want to say 1958.
1958.
And so then in line of that, I wanted to pick something that was kind of categorically in the same era and on what I would consider an equal level of awesomeness. And so for you to watch, I had selected Path of Glory by my boy Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, and what was really interesting about that, I hadn't really given it any thought. You said pick a film, and that was kind of top of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of loosely relates to one of the screenplays I just finished writing. But one of the things that really struck me is that both those films, both Touch of Evil and Paths of Glory, came out within a year of each other.
Yeah.
Paths of Glory came out in 1957,
Mm-hmm.
and Touch of Evil came out in 1958, and they couldn't be farther apart in style, content,
tone,
production,
mm-hmm.
How they were put together. I mean, one represents kind of the old Hollywood system of filmmaking.
Yeah.
And the other, Paths of Glory is an indie film.
Yeah.
What was really interesting about it is it was one of Stanley Kubrick's earlier films,
mm-hmm.
and which he had just finished shooting a film noir classic that I absolutely love called The Killing, and it's funny because I told you when we first started talking about it, I had never seen Paths of Glory.
Yeah.
That's like one of those classic films that somehow slipped through the cracks.
Mm-hmm.
But he and his producer put the same producer that he worked with on The Killing. They're in New York and in England, and they put a package together. They basically financed this independently. They put their whole package together. They got Kirk Douglas on board. They got him on board to star in it, and he was also I think also a producer on the project. And he only agreed to work with them. And Kubrick had to give away a huge chunk of the profits to Kirk Douglas, which I thought was great. Spartacus came about because of this movie. And the thing that was really cool is that they put together a package, the indie filmmakers, and they went to, I think it was MGM or whoever studio, and to say, hey, we have this, we have this project, we want distribution for it, we've got to start talent, and which is pretty much how indie film works today. But,
Yep.
This was in 1957, and it was unheard of.
Yep. Oh, very much. Yeah.
And Touch of Evil was the complete opposite.
Yes.
Touch of Evil started off. It was a Universal project, and Universal went to Charlton Heston they had the rights to a book called Badge of Evil. Actually, both movies were based on books, but Badge of Evil, and they had cast Orson Welles to just star in it.
Oh, okay.
Just star as the heavy. and they were looking for a director, and Charlton Heston, his star was on the rise, and he suggested to Universal, "Why don't you have Orson Welles direct it? He's kind of a good director." And,
And an amazing actor.
yeah, he goes, there's a funny story that when Charlton Heston, when he pitched Orson Welles to Universal, he was on the phone and there was just silence.
Huh. Okay.
It was just absolute silence. And then they went, okay, well, we'll think about it. And they got off the phone. They called Orson Welles and they offered him to direct it, but they told him, if you're going to direct this, we're not paying you a penny more. You're going to do this movie for the same amount that we hired you to star in it, not one penny more.
Okay.
And Orson Welles kind of stuck it back to him and said, if you want me to direct it, I'm going to rewrite the script. And he had 10 days because they were starting pre-production. They had 10 days. He rewrote the entire script, and the original book, Charlton Heston plays this Mexican law officer called, his name is Vargas. And Orson Welles, of course, changed the whole focus of the script from Vargas to his character, Quinlan, this corrupt police detective.
Yeah.
And they shot it in something like 15 days, or they had this crazy, insanely quick production schedule. And the whole movie was made for under $1 million.
Wow, that's crazy.
Orson Welles said they loved the dailies they were getting in. They loved the dailies. Charlton Heston loved everything. The studio execs loved everything. And then when it was time to edit, they would not let Orson Welles onto the lot at Universal. They locked him out. They wouldn't let him edit it.
This sounds about right.
Yeah.
Typical like movie producer thing to do. It's crazy to hear that even like back then that was happening as well. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of funny. It's because it very much happens today as well, where they're like, "Okay, thanks, bye."
Well, Orson Welles was kryptonite, man. Nobody wanted to touch him, and we look back at his career and we look at like Citizen Kane is one of the best American films ever made, and it was so controversial. I mean, when it came out. The movie, it was an attack on, one of the most powerful men in entertainment.
Yeah.
It's an attack on William Randolph Hearst, and Hearst cut off all publicity to RKO Pictures. I mean, that was pretty ballsy for a 24-year-old kid at the time.
Yes. And there's a lot of things in Touch of Evil when I was watching it that I was like, how the fuck did you get away with this in 1958? Because it's a pretty ballsy movie. There's some things in there that's like, wow, damn.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you shared Touch of Evil. I watched it, and I really like this movie. This is a great film. I guess one thing that I just wanted to bring up briefly before we get into it, one thing that I think I've kind of realized this recently. I've had this thought. I think when people talk about movies and people talk about their love for film and the cinema and movies, etc. I think a lot of people never talk about like what they want, what they take away from movies. What I mean by that is like my favorite thing when I watch a movie, my favorite thing more than anything else is that if I'm watching a film and it's about A, you're watching A on screen, but really the movie's about X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. That's my favorite thing in all of cinema. When you're watching the movie Alien, it's this creepy monster killing the crew off one by one, and it's a great horror film. But the movie, in my opinion, is about the horrors of sexuality, in particular, the horrors of rape. And that is to me, that's awesome. And that's probably my favorite thing in movies. Quentin Tarantino did a great interview once where he was talking about how King Kong isn't a movie about a giant monkey. It's not about a giant ape. It's about the African slave trade. And it's like, and when you kind of think of it that way, it can change your perception of a movie. And to me, that's worth talking about. And I
That's the
think,
beauty of cinema. Yeah.
yeah, and some people like to watch movies hey, I want to put my feet up, I want to turn my brain off, I had a bad day at work, and I just, and some people, I love it for the production, I love it for the actors, I love, and I guess kind of, do you have like a general, like out of the things that I'm talking about, do you have like a general thing that you typically like most out of film?
Well, I mean, I I'm I'm real on board with what you were just saying. And movies that I'm attracted to, or that kind of really impact me, are, there's a couple of different levels, and like that, the very first level, it's, I like to be swept away into a world I don't know about, or into something new, or it's strange worlds, or strange, or the past, or the future, something that can kind of sweep me away, kind of like the tide taking you out toward into the ocean.
Uh-huh.
And then, but I think what elevates a movie is when it is about something, when it kind of uses that initial storyline to actually dive deeper into, the human condition, or into, something more meaningful, or so that something that reveals a truth in a way that maybe you didn't look at, originally, or a way you may look at differently, or a way that just might remind you of our shared humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because, uh, it's like I was thinking, the interesting thing with Touch of Evil is it kind of marks the end of the the 25, 30 year-ish, genre of film noir,
Mm-hmm.
kind of the
Yes.
classic film noir. 1958-ish is kind of the end of that era. And the era started really around World War II, in the early 40s, um, as kind of a genre unto itself, and with none other than Orson Welles, starring in Carol Reed's movie The Third Man,
Okay.
which is about this corrupt, this American stuck in Berlin after the war, who basically doesn't care about his fellow man. He's just out to make a profit by
Okay.
selling black market pharmaceuticals, to war torn Berlin.
Hmm.
And that's considered one of the very first. Carol Reed was the director, a British filmmaker, and it was one of the very first film noirs. And it was shot real stark. It was shot on location, real stark. There's a famous scene where Orson Welles is being chased by who used to be his best friend, through the sewers of Berlin, and it's, this stark black and white contrast and stuff.
That's cool.
And it's, you know, I, it's like I always like, the genre of film. I'm very attracted, I think, and I don't know why, but to the, one of the kind of the common threads with the noir narrative is that it's usually involves a story about a regular guy,
Yes.
a common guy who, for whatever reason, is screwed, just gets screwed by the system,
Yep.
screwed by, bad relationships, screwed for no other reason of just being, a middle class kind of guy just trying to make it. And, I've always wondered, like, I've been fascinated by that story. I like other genres too,
Mm-hmm.
but, I think there's some kind of universalness to, like, no matter how hard you try, I think everybody in their lives goes through stretches where it's just like, fuck, man, what the hell?
Yeah.
It's like I tried as hard as I can to do the right thing, and I still got screwed.
Yep. Yep.
And I think, that genre in particular kind of celebrates. It doesn't celebrate getting screwed, but it celebrates the common man and the challenges that each of us has. And, at the time, it was really groundbreaking, because the films of Hollywood, the golden age of Hollywood, were all escapist. It was all, entertainment. It was kind of like a visual opiate get people, musicals. MGM had its musicals and monster movies and things that were just to get you to kind of forget, that your daily woes.
Yes,
And
especially during, and I think a big push of that is the Great Depression. A
yeah,
lot of those escape reality movies got really big because it was like, hey, you have no money and life sucks right now. Watch this movie, yeah, about this giant ape. Like
yeah. And maybe it's because of, we're in a pandemic and coming off of 4 years of just a shit show. And but it's like I've been kind of redrawn back to the genre. And and I think, Touch of Evil, what's really interesting about the movie is that, here you've got two cops. It takes place in a border town, and it's there's a murder that's happened. And I think it's really interesting. It deals with racism, overt racism that's
oh yeah.
applicable today. Charlton Heston plays a Mexican law enforcement, high-ranking official in the Mexican government,
Yep.
and which is, for the time, they have a white guy playing a Mexican guy. I mean, that's racist in and of itself.
Yes.
Um, but he plays kind of the moral high. He is the moral high road of the story. And Orson Welles plays this corrupt, corrupt border sheriff who
Vile,
vile, lying, racist, just
disgusting.
drunken,
Yeah.
disgusting,
Yeah.
just hideous, drunken. You know, just there's nothing really redeeming about him,
No.
other than the fact that even though he's reprehensible, he does solve the crime.
Yep. Yep.
you know,
In a very weird roundabout way, but yes.
yeah, and that's I'm fascinated by that, and it's everything. He's repugnant, but he solves the crime and brings the criminals to justice. And Orson Welles was really interesting. And I try to, when I write, I take these words to heart.
Okay.
When he gave an interview like in the 1970s about this movie, and he said they asked him about the Quinlan character, and Orson Welles just laughed, and he goes, "Yeah, Quinlan's morally ambiguous," and he said, and he goes, "But everybody has their reasons."
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, every character has their reasons, and it doesn't matter how despicable they are. To them, they think, it's justified for whatever reasons,
Yeah. Yes.
whatever life is thrown at them. And he had this really interesting quote that I try to apply when I'm writing. And he said, he goes, the more human that you make the monster, the more interesting it is for the audience.
Yes. 1,000,000%.
And
Yeah.
and and I think that's if you think about it, the movies where the villain or the bad guy is really memorable and becomes iconic are villains and bad guys that you can relate to in a weird, strange way. And it doesn't matter; they could be cannibals. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
in some weird way, you relate to them because they're in their own twisted, messed up way. They, it they have their reasons for what they did.
Yeah.
And and there are layers of humanity that make it interesting. It's the villains that are so one dimensional. It's just you know I I get bored. I get bored when I watch a movie when the bad guy is just horrible. Even like you mentioned Alien before. The what makes the alien creature so intriguing, and not just the first movie, but all the subsequent movies is that theme of rape and sexual assault,
Mm-hmm.
but also the fact of motherhood.
Yep.
And it's like, and it takes these tropes and these ideas, and the filmmakers twist them around to make you kind of look at it and go, I never really thought about
That.
what
Yeah.
that means to be a parent or a mother, or to be abused or violated. And it's I just think it's fascinating. I often think, we're attracted to movies more so by the villainy than by the heroics.
Yes, yeah.
I'm rambling. See, I've gone down that hole, man. I've
Dude,
gone down that rabbit hole.
that's why you're here, man. I'm just sipping my coffee, having a great Sunday. I don't know about you, but I'm having a great time. I and to escalate to toot the horn really quick of Alien even further more too. One of the reasons that that's like one of my favorite movies too is like everything you just said 100% A plus correct. But there's also then even to like another layer is a little bit of the humanity that you were talking about in Villains is the humanity of corporate greed, because that's another layer to the film Alien. Is you realize this corporation has effectively fucked these people on this ship to just do whatever it takes to bring it back. And again, that's the hook. And even if you relate to it 10%, you're gonna then understand it. And
Right.
like what you're saying with Orson Welles' character in this movie,
It's and it's same thing with Touch of Evil. I mean, think about that Quinlan character. I mean, and the being on the border town and the corruption with the local politicians,
yep.
and I mean, and blaming, just blaming the Mexicans for this or that. I mean, it I that kind of corruption that kind of motivates the story runs is kind of the cornerstone of Touch of Evil.
Yes.
And there's no real escaping it. And in it even touches the Vargas character. He's Vargas is on his honeymoon. Even his relationship with his wife has this like this moral purity to it that Quinlan manages to corrupt.
And get his
in
hooks
every
in.
action. Yeah, and I think I love the dichotomy too. Vargas is there on his is basically on the American side of the border on his honeymoon, and Quinlan, and that's at the beginning of the movie, and then at the end of the movie, Quinlan is on the Mexican side of the border with Marlene Dietrich, who runs a whorehouse.
Yep.
The only meaningful relationship in Quinlan's life is the woman that runs a whorehouse.
Yep. Who makes really good chili.
Yeah, and I thought that was, I think that's really interesting. Kind of the dichotomy of those characters.
Let's I guess briefly go kind of like on the overview of the film, the Spark Note summary, I guess, sort of it, in case anybody listening has not seen this film. I think eventually too, just FYI for anyone listening, we will get into spoiler territory. So I guess we'll start with the overview, but then X amount of minutes later, we'll probably start getting into it. But I'm going to start with saying that I'm really, really glad that you shared this movie. It's kind of funny how life has a weird way of coming back to you. When I was in film school, I was 18 years old, and we had to take like a film theory, film analysis class. And the teacher for that class, I remember he played the opening of this movie as a way to discuss and to talk about how to create tension. Yeah. And I swear to God, I remember the opening scene from all the way back in when I was 18 years old. I remember that this opening of this movie will stay in your memory till the end of time, because it is amazing.
It's one of the greatest movie openings of all time. And there's so many filmmakers afterwards have paid homage to Welles and have replicated or done something similar. The movie The Player comes to mind.
Okay.
The opening scene of The Player is a direct homage to Touch of Evil. And they even talk about the length. It's like 3 minutes and 21 seconds or whatever. And it's the thing that makes that opening scene even more remarkable is the technology at the time.
Yes.
If you think about how heavy film cameras were in lights and how slow the film stock was. So for people that haven't seen it, the opening scene is one continuous shot. And the tension that you're talking about, it starts off with a close-up of somebody putting dynamite in the trunk of a car. And the camera pulls back, and in one shot with no edit, you see a couple get into the car and drive off and through this busy Friday night nightlife in this Mexican border town, and they drive blocks, and you know that there's a ticking bomb in their car, and as they weave their way through the crowds of this busy Mexican town, they get to the border, and you realize that they're at the border between the U.S. and Mexico, and they stop and they talk to border guards, and that's when you are introduced to Charlton Heston and his wife, Vargas, who's there on his honeymoon. And as they're talking about the honeymoon, the car drives across the border and blows up. And this is all one shot, and it's all at night. And it's amazing because as a viewer, you're like, oh my God, there's dynamite.
Yeah. Yep. And there's civilians around, and
there's civilians, and why did they want to kill this guy? Um, and, and it's fascinating. He shot no coverage for it. He spent they shot the movie in Venice Beach, California. If you've ever been to Venice Beach, that scene was shot on Windward Avenue, and it was in kind of a side note. Venice Beach, kind of as a location, kind of was run down and past its prime, exactly like Orson Welles in his career, and he couldn't have picked a better place to shoot it. Venice Beach, when it was first created, it was this beautiful city of canals that was based on Venice, Italy, and all the arches that are the visual for that Mexican border town.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those buildings are still there today.
Wow.
And it's the city was built. It was these beautiful canals, and the only way to get around the city was by gondola. And Charlie Chaplin shot the circus there. Hal Roach shot Spanky and Our Gang films there. It was this beautiful backdrop for filming. And in the late 1920s, the two things happened. The guy that started the city, Abbott Kinney, passed away, and his son kind of took over. It was a kind of a private. It was not part of Los Angeles.
Okay.
It was its own municipality, and his son annexed the city to the city of Los Angeles, and Los Angeles was very corrupt, and they paid. It was kind of the rise of the automobile, and they paved over all of the canals, all of these beautiful canals to make way for the automobile. And to this day, there's I think there's only like 2 or 3 canals left in Venice Beach.
Wow.
And the only reason they're there is because the contractor that was hired by the city was so corrupt that he stole the money, and they ran out of money and quit his job.
And that seems like a theme that could even fit in this movie as well, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
So,
but in the late 20s, oil was discovered in Venice Beach.
Huh.
So within the span of like a year, and Venice Beach was like this huge tourist destination. It was kind of like Santa Monica. It had this big pier. It had this midway. It attracted tourists from all over the world. And in the span of a year, when oil was discovered, hundreds and hundreds of oil rigs went up. And there's pictures of like people on the beach, like sunning themselves in this industrial wasteland. This toxic dump of oil, and I mean, just horribly, and just ugly as shit. Yeah. And that's the city that Orson Welles filmed in, and you can see in some of those night shots in the movie, the whorehouse at the end, the chase across the bridge when Quinlan gets shot and falls into the shitty garbage along the water.
Yep.
That's the canal. That's one of the canals.
Interesting. Okay.
And you can see the oil towers, the oil rigs in the background of some of the night shots. But I just love just the little things that he shot this movie in a city that had been corrupted by greed, and it's a movie about corruption and greed. and there's just like this, just these layer upon layer of coolness for, to the story that I really think is really incredible.
Who pays for it, Marcia?
What if she does?
Oh, how long has this been going on now?
Ever since her father had me fired from the last job, if you want to know.
Naturally, he objected to having a Mexican shoe clerk for a son-in-law, so naturally, you had to put him out of the way.
Naturally! You'll read something good.
Well, just because he speaks a little guilty, that don't make him innocent.
So the car explodes, and then immediately right there is yes, the character's official name is Mike Vargas, played by Charlton Heston. He's with his wife Susan. The bomb goes off, and then he's effectively thrust into this investigation. Kind of, I would say, kind of
because
against
he's a key witness.
Yeah, and it's kind of like almost. It seems like it's kind of against his will. Like he's like, shit, like I got to do this. Sorry, sweetheart, bye. And then that's
he's on his honeymoon.
Yeah, and then that's when the rest of the film kicks off. But then what's really interesting about this movie, the thing that I liked is the rest of the movie isn't then even really about the car bombing nor the explosion. It's, you know what I mean? Like it is about it, but the rest of the movie is mostly then about the police officers and the crime family that's involved.
Right.
And that's what it's about. Like, I don't even, if they do even say the names of the people in the car, I don't even remember them. You know what I mean? It's just like they're gone because that's the catalyst to start the film. And that's another thing that I loved about this movie is it just starts. Some older films have a tendency to they had to over-explain things because people just weren't super privy to film in that form of storytelling. So it was like, we have to spend 20 minutes establishing Mike Vargas and that he's a police detective from Mexico. This film's like, fuck it. Let's just do it live. Let's just go. And they just put a fucking bomb in a trunk. It blows up. And then bam, you're in this story and you understand it and it moves you forward. And then we meet the police force headed by Orson Welles playing Hank Quinlan, as we've talked about. And then you also meet the Mexican crime family that is involved in this story. I don't remember that actor's name off the top of my head, but the guy that is effectively running the crime family, that actor is amazing.
Yeah, that face, that round face with a little mustache and the sweaty brow. You'll never forget that. I mean, the scene in the kind of moving forward, and the scene when they kidnap Vargas's wife and are holding her. That scene you will never forget. No, and it doesn't matter if it was made in 1958 or black and white or it's not color. That scene you will never forget. No, it's so well done. And
like he has there's some people, I don't know if there's a term for this, but there's some people where like the way light hits them, it just works. And like that scene that you're talking about, he just looks creepy as all fuck. Like the way, like the angles of his face and the lighting in that scene it was amazing. It was really good.
Yeah, Wells shot that with that scene with wider angle lenses. Okay. And played the scene closer up, and also with kind of uncomfortable with camera angles. He kind of played against the rule of the thirds. And it was lit really stark. I mean, everything in that was conceived to make the audience feel uncomfortable.
Oh, for sure. And he does a great job on, I think, everything in this. And kind of going back to what I was thinking about again, where you're watching a movie, but really it's kind of about something else. A major word for this film that stands out to me, the film is about prejudice. The film is about issues of, again, like, Orson Welles' character is effectively like, well, they're Mexican, so who cares if we frame them? They're lesser people. And it's interesting to see a movie. I don't know if interesting is the right word. I guess, I don't know how to phrase it. There were movies made dating back all the way to 1958 that are talking about issues of things that we are still dealing with to this day. It's relevant.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. If you watch that movie today, in light of the Trump administration's treatment of people from Central America and from Mexico, and you watch this movie and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And the themes are so relevant today, and yet they were discussed, over half a century ago, almost 75 years ago. And it's an eye opener. It can be sad that there's been some progress on some fronts, but
Yes.
not others and others. But it really is remarkable. I think we tend to think of challenges or problems in the world as unique to our time.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things about cinema, is that it reminds you that some of these issues have been discussed and top of mind for our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation.
Yep, they've got deep roots, and that's why some of these issues are so important to so many people, because it's like they've been people in Mexico have been dealing with these issues for a very long time, and there's a history to it, and so it's not just as simple as some people make it out to be, and to go back and see things like this film and go, oh my God, he was talking about these issues all the way back in 1958. The year is currently 2020, and again, like this movie.
Well, and like in 1958, you don't think, when you think of the 50s, if you think of the 50s in terms of the way that the conservative, the political conservative right describes the 1950s as all pure and all, the good old days, that when things were good for America. And then you have a movie where you've got scenes with these kids, these crazy kids that are dope dealer, dope smoking, heroin dealing, it's like, the drug dealing is a major part of this movie, and it was in 1958.
And so is like violence and crime. And it's one of the previous episodes with my friend Zeke, we were talking about the show F is for Family, and that show takes place in the early 70s, and we were kind of talking about how that was, the 60s and 70s was very much the explosion of bringing a lot of these issues to the forefront of American society. So on kind of that same note, that's why I think this film is doubly interesting, because he was already kind of behind that curtain in the 50s. With this film of saying, no, these things are out there. It's just, like in that same episode, a lot of people, like Zeke and I were talking about how they handle like women, children, and gay culture in the show of F is for Family. It comes from the idea of like, it just wasn't talked about. And that's always been one of the major issues. So it's awesome to see Orson Welles making a film talking about these things again back in 1958.
And the interesting thing is, he's so dead on in his observations of the corrupting influence of money and politics in American life. He's so dead on. The movie, when it was finished, Universal tried to bury it.
Oh, I bet.
They Charlton Heston had just won an Oscar, and his star was on the rise, and Universal didn't put out any publicity to support the movie. They released it in a couple of theaters in the United States, and they tried to make it go away. And it wasn't until, I think it was 1959, it was a year later, the movie was entered into a film festival in, I think, Paris or Brussels, somewhere in Europe.
Okay.
And it won Best Picture.
Wow.
And when it won Best Picture in Europe, Universal they actually fired their European distributor for allowing that to happen. And, talk about like the pressure of censorship, that it was alive and well in the 50s. But it really wasn't until, the movie found success in Europe that it found an audience here in the United States, in spite of the fact that Universal Studios tried to kill it.
Wow.
And I thought that was really, and I think a lot of it is because of the subject matter. Because there's it's about corruption and drugs, and even Marlene Dietrich, she's plays the madam of a whorehouse.
Yep, who makes really good chili.
Yeah, makes great chili.
Makes amazing chili, from what I understand. And Orson Welles wishes he was getting fat off that chili, which I'm sure is an innuendo for anything else. And
what's my fortune? You've been reading the cards, haven't you?
I've been doing the accounts.
Come on, read my future for me.
You haven't got any.
What do you mean?
Your future is all used up.
Well, even early on, there's like when they're looking, there's a scene in a strip club too.
Yep.
Tactfully shot, if I remember correctly. One thing about Marlene Dietrich, again, all these like obscure facts, but Marlene Dietrich was in the kind of old school Hollywood back from Orson Welles' Citizen Kane days.
Okay.
In the 1930s, and she was Hollywood royalty, and Universal didn't even know she was in the movie until they saw the dailies. Orson Welles asked her as a favor to be in it, and as a favor to him, she said yes, absolutely. And when the producers at Universal saw the dailies and they went, "Oh my God, that's Marlene Dietrich," they called her up and they said, "You're not, we didn't even know that you're going to be in this, and how much is this costing us?" And because the budget was under $1 million for the movie, and she said, "If you put my name in the credits, it will cost you far more than you can afford. But if you don't put my name in the credits, I'll take SAG minimum."
Wow.
That was like her personal favor to Orson Welles.
That's cool.
To help him get the movie made. And I think that's pretty cool.
Casey, would you take a look in the desk there? There might be some letters or something. That isn't, unless you've already looked the place over.
We know better than that, Captain. We were waiting for you.
No deben hacer eso. No tienen ningún derecho de leer mis cartas. Tú eres policía mexicano y debes proteger a...
I don't speak Mexican.
Eres cobarde. Y le tienes miedo a estos gringos.
Let's keep it in English, Vargas.
The film too, when I was with everything that we've been talking about again, about its themes, its message, I always like to think when I watch movies or anything of the sort, I always like to think how I perceive it, and then I always like to think of how like old grandma Nanners is gonna think of it. You know what I mean? Like
old grandma Nanners.
Oh, Scooby, we're gonna go. We're
smoking her corncob pipe out on the front porch. Spitting chew down below.
Yeah, I saved up a nickel. We're gonna go see a movie. I could not like
those talkies.
I think about there were I know you definitely know this.
Christmas present for you from Grandma Nanner.
Old Grandma Nanners, and there was one of my favorite film history tidbits. There was the Lumiere brothers. They were French. They created the oh my God, what did they call them? The actualities. Oh my God. They made movies where it was like people just walking into a factory, and then they would go to that factory and say, "Hey, come to our theater, and you can see yourself on the big screen, and it's cheap, and just come." And they're kind of, some people consider to be, the grandfathers of filmmaking, because they also were the first to invent a playback camera.
Yeah, and they did Trip to the Moon.
Yep, and one of the shorts that they made, all it was a train that docks in a station. That's it. It comes around a corner, and then it docks in a station, and there's steam coming out the front. That's it. People in the theater ducked when the train came in their seats. They ducked down, and it scared the shit out of them.
But think about it, though. I mean, this is a new medium. It's a new art form, and if you think about it, film is a language.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
it has its own language, and it has its own beat, it has its own timing, it has its own pacing, it has its own rules, just like any other language.
Oh yeah.
And you think about, you talk about the Lumiere, you talk about Orson Welles with Citizen Kane, what makes that movie great. You talk about, the Lumiere brothers. It's like they actually were creating these images, and they didn't have a language yet.
They had nothing to go off of. Yeah.
They're creating language as they go along. And then it was filmmakers after that they grab onto things and go, oh, what, we can, it's like a child, grasping, mama, papa, they can't form full, complete sentences, but you gradually build on that, on that until you get into much more sophisticated ideas that you can express using that language, which Wells does and what Kubrick does in Paths of Glory. And it's, I just think it's fascinating to kind of watch that language develop over the last 120 years.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's crazy to think too. Yeah, it's been 120 years of filmmaking, and the language has changed. Yeah, so much, and
but the basics haven't.
No, exactly. Yeah, and but the thing, the point that I was kind of talking about too is with this is in line with what we were talking about, but is again, if people ducked in a movie theater because of a train entering a docking station, what the hell did they think of this movie when it came out? Like,
yeah,
I'd kill to be a member of like some Southern Baptist town watching this movie, because I bet you $1 million to one people lost their fucking mind. Like, how dare you say that, any police officer can be corrupt? How dare you, say that Mexicans have equal rights as Americans? And how dare you, this movie, like, they're drugging up women. There's the scene where Susan Vargas is changing in her bedroom, and one of the criminals across the alleyway shines a flashlight right on her while she's changing it, and you see her in her bra. And I was just like, how the fuck did you get away with this in 1958? I would love to go back in time, and I guarantee there had to have been at least one person to walk out of this theater, at least one.
And think that was at the height of censorship, the industry censorship. And they still, he pushed the boundaries, man. He totally pushed it about. I like the fact too that she just takes it in stride. Her character takes it in stride.
Yeah, she
looks out the window. What the hell are you looking at?
She chucks a light bulb at him, and then Charlton Heston's character comes in, and he's like, "Darling, I can't see you. Turn on the light." And she's like, "I can't." But yeah, this movie, man, it's great. I highly recommend it if you're a fan of old cinema. But even I don't even want to say this is old cinema. Again, like we've been talking about, in this, you could take the script of this movie and make it in 2020. All you'd have to do is solve some issues on like cell phones. That'd really be about it. Because some of the issues could be solved with the cell phone. But beyond that, you could.
Yeah, it's universal. It's a universal story, and that's what makes it, I think, so interesting, is that it does kind of transcend, for everything we've been talking about.
Yeah,
it's a story about it points to something that's universal that each generation tries to deal with, and that keeps it relevant. And it doesn't matter that it's black and white. It doesn't matter, that opening 3.5 minute sequence at the time was so revolutionary. It was revolutionary because he used all 1,000, the film magazine, the biggest mag is 1,000-foot reel, and he used the entire 1,000-foot mag. He couldn't go any longer. He couldn't. He didn't have more time to go. It wasn't like, I'm just going to hit the on button. It's not like I can hold the camera in my hand and let it play for 10 minutes.
Yep.
He didn't have that luxury. He had a 250-pound camera that had to be mounted on the back of a crane that could only had 1,000 feet of film in it. So, and they had to have so much light because they were shooting at night and the film stocks were slow.
And they didn't have, back then they didn't, like, today you can use, like, electricity generators, and they had generators back then, but not to the same capacity that they are now. And those lights back then, A, were highly dangerous, and B, super hard to power and operate and run. And yeah, the camera, it moves over quite a landscape. And like you were saying, to think about how they lit all of that is bananas.
And then night. They did the whole thing in one night.
Yep. And the technical production of this is amazing. The thing that I like too, another thing that stood out to me, there is the term subversion of expectations, and I feel like it's used a lot, especially in the last, I want to say, like 3-4 years of storytelling, but people are doing it wrong, in my opinion. But this film does not. I was watching it, and it's like, it's obviously from square one, it is a film noir. There is no hiding that. But a lot of film noir is the detective in his office, and the woman whose husband has recently gone missing comes in, and she hires him for the job, and that propels him into all of this. So again, he's on vacation. He's not even doing his job. He gets pulled into it, and then it's kind of like, oh, okay, he's gonna crack the case and he's gonna solve it, but it subverts your expectation because, like you were saying, he does not solve the case of the trunk bombing. He solves the case of police corruption, and it's like it's really cool, and they build those tropes up in the beginning. Like there's a scene where Charleston Heston, Vargas's character, he's walking around. And one of the crime family people come up and they throw a vial of acid at him, and he dodges it, and then he punches the guy and he gets in a fight, and it's kind of building up that he's going to be this action superstar. But besides that, that's really it. You know what I mean? It's they build all these things up, and then the reality of what's really going on, inch by inch, crawls into the story, and you understand these characters, their background, their history, and that is a trillion times more interesting than, just the super cool detective who can just shoot every bad guy and wins and gets the dame at the end of the day. Like, all this dude wants to do is just go back to his hotel room and chill with his wife. That's all he wants to do, like.
Yeah. I mean, she's kidnapped, and, her reputation is tarnished. And, by association, Vargas's reputation is tarnished. And, and like we said earlier, Quinlan, the corrupt cop, the guy who is just, he's using terrible, horrible police methods. At the end of the day, he does solve the crime. And, and to me, it's like, that's kind of what, film noir, what I like about film noir is visually, it's stark contrast, black and white. Yet the stories are so much nuanced layers of gray.
Yeah.
And I even like the genre itself is, between that stark black and white visual and the subject matter that's gray, to me is like really fascinating to watch. And I think it elevates it to this whole new level. And, there's certainly film noir that's color. I mean, you look at Blade Runner is a great example. I mean, that movie was shot in color, and yet, it still deals with like this gray morass of morality, and what's, what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, what's real, what's not real. And, and I think that's kind of the hallmark of a really good film noir and really good storytelling.
Yes.
And to me, and that gives it, it's at the same time, it's cinematic and by definition unreal, and yet it strives to show a mirror on the reality of life, that life is complicated and there are levels of gray. We're all compromised in some way, and and I think that I really like that kind of contrast. I think it makes it very, very interesting.
Yeah, and I played this. I promise this is going to connect. I played Dungeons and Dragons. I love Dungeons and Dragons. One of my favorite games. I play with my friends. It's a great time. And one of my favorite things to do is to put the my players, I run the game, so I put my players into situations of like, what would you do? Because both situations are shitty. So what's the lesser of two evils? And that to me is fascinating. And this movie has a lot of that as well. As we've been talking about, there's a lot of police corruption, but then there is also the idea of the police involved in the corruption know there's corruption, and eventually we do get one whistleblower, but it takes quite an immeasurable amount for him to get to that place. And when he does, you're cheering him on, because that's a theme that, again, from 1958, which is like, we got to take care of our own at any means, by any cost. And it's like, holy fuck.
Yeah. And you raise a really good point too. Think about, and this was made before the term, that the blue line, that solid line of, of police.
Yeah.
Think about that. The police in that story, like the Quinlan's underlings, no one speaks up, no one says anything. And like, think about that in terms of like what happened this last summer with George Floyd.
Yep.
And what's the worst crime? That corrupt police officer that killed Floyd, or the 3 police officers that stood by and let him do that?
Exactly.
And it's like, they're monstrous acts. They're different acts, but they're just as monstrous.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that is touched upon in this movie in 1958.
1958 is crazy, and it's again, this movie, I really do think you could just pick up the script and make the film today, and you could leave all of it the same. Obviously, new actors, but that's it. It's a good film, and I like Paths of Glory. We'll obviously talk about that film, but the one thing about that movie is it was one of the first movies. It might actually be the first movie to have not just like an army personnel, but like a general, a commander, to have a scar on his face that had never been done in film, from my understanding. And this has got to be one of the first films. Touch of Evil has to be one of the first films, I would imagine, to talk about again, police corruption and covering for your own. So it's kind of interesting that we both have films that we picked that were kind of, I would imagine, if not first, one of the first in said category.
Well, there are actually other film noir examples of noir films from like the 40s and 50s that do deal with police corruption, but not on the nuanced level that this does.
Okay.
And I didn't know that about Paths of Glory.
There was it was the first. I'm like 90% certain of this, that it was the first movie to have a military personnel have scars, because up to that point, all those army movies of the early days of cinema, it was always about making these military people look like absolute shining heroes. That was always the number one thing. And Kubrick was like, no, when you fight and you go to war, you get scars. And then that scar is also representative of that character. And we'll get into that later. But they're definitely, I would say, films that, and we've been talking about this, that were very much pioneers into subject matter and ideas that, again, I think still work great today. There was also another point that I wanted to bring up. There is a character in this movie that I feel like if I was born in the era and the South would have been me. And that character is the hotel clerk.
Do you know who that is? Do you know what actor that is?
I don't. I'm really terrible with actors' names, so I don't.
It's Dennis Weaver.
Okay.
That's the very first role that Dennis Weaver was ever in. And Dennis Weaver went on in the 70s. He was a big television star. There was a show, the Sunday night. It was like the same night that Columbo. It was like there was a series of these crime movies in the 70s made for TV. It was like Columbo, and then Dennis Weaver played this cop from like Montana that ends up in New York City. I mean, it was like This was like one of his very first roles, one of his very first speaking roles.
That's interesting.
Funny. I was going to bring that up earlier, but
I was watching it and I was just like, I was like, yeah, that would have been me if I had been born in that day and in that era. So I just felt very, very connected to that person. But there was a lot of other great things with this film. I mean, it's one of my favorite lines is, and again, this goes back to talking about having Quinlan be, he's a person. He wakes up every morning, he drinks his coffee just like us, he ties his shoes just like us, and he goes to work just like us. But his thinking is that he is doing something good. He's a cop. People automatically love him for that, because I'm sure there were moments in his life that he, did the right thing. You'd have to imagine at least one or two of them were, done correctly. And then slowly this case is, he's the cracks are starting to show, and he knows it. And, the wire's getting down, and I can't remember who says it, but somebody shouts at him, "You're a killer." And his response is, "I'm a cop." And I was like, oh, damn, like that, I think that's probably my favorite line out of the whole movie, because that's a sentence that it means one thing, but it can also mean a lot of other things as well. And you could probably talk about that to yourself for like hours. And there's a lot of that in this movie, again, where there's something going on, but under the surface, there's other things going on as well that I think will stay with you and make you think. And I think that's always like the greatest thing any story in any art medium in this world can do is you walk away from it and you think about it and it stays with you. And this movie 1,000,000% will do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the title, I like the title. I'm glad that he changed. The original title of the project was Badge of Evil.
Okay.
And I'm glad he changed it to Touch of Evil. And I think it plays into the idea that we're all corruptible.
Yes.
We're all we all are susceptible to corruption and to tolerating corruption to a certain extent. It's like your idea of like, is, who cares if the cop is corrupt as long as he gets the job done?
Exactly. And it's like,
it doesn't affect my life. So,
mm-hmm.
But the fact that it does affect other people's lives. But then it's just a touch of evil. I just think it's understated and poetic, and it's a brilliant title.
Oh, 1,000,000%. And it goes into like, again, it's everybody in this movie, maybe with the exception of Charlton Heston characters, has themselves a touch of evil, and it's slowly exposed. And like what you were saying with the corruption, it that always kind of reminds me of. I love the movie The Wolf of Wall Street. It's one of my favorite movies, and to me, that movie is very much about like, what would you do in this situation? Because there's an equal chance that you would have been exactly like this guy had you been making the copious amounts of money. Went through the greed that he did. That again, like.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that I would never toss a midget, but I probably would.
Exactly. And it's like there are these things inside of us that it's like it's easy to say, oh, he's an asshole. But again, if you were in that boat, you have just the equal amount of doing said evil things. So it's the choices that we make that truly define us. And so Touch of Evil goes into that where, again, Orson Welles' character, he's deciding to do this, and it's beyond evident. He's planting evidence. He's planting, the dynamite on people that had nothing to do with the crime. And then you also, at the beginning too, it's like right away you understand, okay, these are the criminals. This is the crime family. They're the bad guys. But you also learn to see the humanity of them as well. And you can hopefully understand maybe even then how they got there as well. No one's born a criminal. You do have to, you work into it. But even with that, there are reasons for it. And I feel like this film kind of does that as well. It could have gone deeper, but it's still there. And you learn the humanity side of everybody in this story. And it's an awesome package that is beautifully wrapped with a bow, and it's ready and waiting because it's been out for a long time. So if you haven't seen Touch of Evil and you're looking for just a awesome, great film to sit back, watch, and think about. I would highly recommend this, and I think Mike would too. You picked it, so
And just a plug, if you haven't seen it and you want to watch it, try to get your hands on the Criterion Collection print, because that is the most pristine. They went back to the original negative and did the film transfer into high def, and it is the cleanest, best looking copy of the film. I've seen it original versions that are dirty and scratched and dark, and it's like a dub of a dub of a dub, and if you can get the Criterion Collection, it's worth it.
Okay. We have very limited space in my Chicago apartment, so I have a tendency to purchase movies. I bought it on iTunes, and in my opinion, I think it looks great. It had a 4K. It said it had a 4K restoration, so I think that looked amazing when I watched it.
They may have pulled that off of the Criterion transfer, which is good.
I don't know for 1,000,000% fact, but I can say it looked really good on iTunes as well. So if you are after a digital version or a physical copy, both of those options I think would be superb. Is there anything else? I just want to make sure I'm not taking anything away from anything else that you may have wanted to say about this.
I just want to again say what Charlton Heston said, when he was talking to the producers at Universal, that Orson Welles, he's a pretty good director.
That's funny. There's also too, I'm sure you've seen this, Mike, but there is, for anyone at home listening, I swear it will be worth your time. Stop everything you're doing and sometime today, hop on YouTube and type in Orson Welles. I think it's a champagne commercial. Is it champagne?
Oh yeah. Where he's drunk.
Yeah. It's a whole montage.
It's hilarious.
Somebody hired him to do, I think it's a champagne. It's either champagne or wine or something. Either way,
it's a champagne. It's a champagne commercial. Yeah.
And they bring him in to be the main actor for this champagne, and they made the mistake of actually giving him champagne.
Yeah.
And Orson Welles,
each take he gets drunk.
Oh my God. And he's sitting at a table with a couple, and like you can see the couple's face. He's like, and then I'm gonna the champagne gonna do great. And it's like, and you can just see their face like, I don't know what the fuck to do right now. And this is Orson Welles, like, should I smile? Should I be freaked out? Oh my God. It's hilarious, and it's absolutely worth your time. Well, okay. Well, I thank you, Mike, for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for everybody for tuning in. I think I haven't been saying that also. I'm very new at this. So thank you for chiming in. The movie has been Touch of Evil by Orson Welles. Check it out. Very much worth the watch. Very much worth your time. And we will be back. Mike and I will be back the next episode to talk about Passive Glory by Stanley Kubrick. So thank you very much, everybody.
How could you arrest me here? This is my country.
This is where you're gonna die. There wasn't no miss, Vargas. That was just to turn you around. I don't want to shoot you in the back. Unless you'd rather try to run for it.